we going to do the Niles Barnard House relocation first and then tax abatement policy, or the other way?
We'd like to proceed that way, Your Honor.
Okay.
And in terms of the Niles Barnard House relocation, the big question that we want you to have an answer for and embrace is why move the Barnard House to the museum site when the museum is slated to be closed June 30th, 2011, unless it can find a way to become self-supporting. And wanted to get council direction on that matter. If you agree with staff that it should be moved, as well as the Historical Society, then we'll modify the contract at our next meeting or the meeting thereafter, because we would have the Historical Society be responsible for the actual construction activities and moving the house. And I have, and if I may invite Lorraine Campbell and Ward Randall to the table.
Certainly.
They can explain the rationale for making this move to the building. And I just want to talk briefly, if I could, about Mr. Norm Barnard, who lived in the house. I had the pleasure of knowing Mr. Barnard, and always thought that if the city of Troy ever had a father, it was Mr. Barnard. He went from township supervisor to advocating the city of Troy being a municipality, and he told me many stories about how that occurred. I was a guest in his house, and the house, aside from being historically significant in terms of its architecture, also has great significance and is a physical representation, I think, of our city heritage, because Mr. Barnard lived there. So with that, Ward, are you or Lorraine going to speak first?
I'm sure you all know that the Niles Barnard House was built by Johnson Niles in 1837, which is the same year that Michigan became a state. And it's only been owned by two families. Harriet and Norman Barnard acquired it in 1941, and Harriet died 2 years ago. And that's one of the reasons for our concern, and one of the reasons we think now is the time to move it. It's a unique historical treasure in this community. It's irreplaceable, and we're afraid that we're going to lose it if we don't move it by the end of this year. There are two documents that control the move. One is the gift agreement from Harriet to the city in 2005, which expired originally in 2009. We presented an amendment to council to extend it until the end of 2010, which is in effect. The second document is an agreement between the Historical Society and the city in January of 2006 regarding our heritage campaign, and moving the house was the first project of this campaign. Now, of course, at that time, our intent was to expand and improve the museum, and suddenly, as a result of the millage in February, we find ourselves in a survival mode. But we do feel that our priority is to save the house, and we save houses, or the Troy Historical Society saves houses in Troy by moving them to the museum. So that's the first point. The second point is that we have a contract with our donors. We have both an ethical and a legal obligation to our many donors who gave us money specifically, expressly, for the purpose of moving the house to the museum. And if we fail to do that within the time frame contemplated by these agreements, we're precluded from using that money for anything else. We're talking about 6 figures here. And trying to find the donors and give the money back to them when they've already taken their tax deductions for the donations would be a real problem. Thirdly, to the point that John raised about the future of the museum, we're well aware that for budgetary reasons it's scheduled to be closed next June 30th, but with the museum director and the Cultural Alliance of Michigan, which I think you'll talk about, Rainey, we are working very hard on ways to keep the museum open on a different basis, a sustainable basis, so that the people of Troy will still be able to access its treasures. Rainey, do you want to continue?
You have been receiving regular written reports from our transition team. You have one in your agenda packet this evening. I have been meeting regularly with Mr. Zerlag, Mr. Lamorato, Carol Anderson, Kathy Russ, and members of our team. We recognize that there's no simple solution for the museum or a lot of cultural institutions in this community and in surrounding communities. As I have said to many people, there is no knight on a big white horse that's going to come in and rescue us. And we have to think of a new way of doing business. And that is what we are pursuing. We are working very hard on a plan that would be permanent, sustainable, and strategic, that would provide an opportunity for the museum and other cultural institutions to continue to provide services within their communities. I cannot tell you that it is done. I can tell you that we are in the process of submitting important applications, that we've had support from the city to do this in terms of in-kind support, that we are working closely with the Cultural Alliance of Southeastern Michigan, with the Michigan Nonprofit Association, with other government entities, with other nonprofit organizations, looking at a new way of doing business. And if we're successful, then, and I do think we will be. The one thing that one of our consultants has said is the good thing about our plan is it's pure. It has its intent is to continue to provide important services within communities in a long-term sustainable way. I will continue to keep you updated. Someone asked me if I was optimistic. I would not use that word. I would say we are determined. Mm-hmm. And we have dug our heels in, and we will continue working. And I think being very pragmatic and realistic, but keeping in mind the mission of the museum and the mission of the Historical Society, and frankly the mission of other heritage resources in our community, we can achieve the goal. And I feel confident that if the Barnard House is moved, that's a really important step to take. I did a little research this morning, and the DIA, that incredible structure in Detroit, was built, if you will, in the midst of the Depression. And where I don't try to hold the Troy Museum and Historic Village on the same level as the Detroit Institute of Arts, the fact that a community had hope and that they still had vision and they continued to build even when times are tough and they're resilient, that's what I think the Troy Historical Society is aiming for with the city of Troy, and that's why I really hope that you will continue to support their efforts, and I will continue to do my level best to work with them through the rest of this year and into the future.
We do believe that better times are coming. I think you've said that, and I've heard it in other places too. One thing I haven't heard is the phrase shovel-ready. We're ready to go. This is a shovel-ready project, and it will create a few jobs.
I love the fact that you use the word determined, because that's the exact word that Judge Norman Barnard would have used and did use when he and Harriet and the others were sitting on the floor in their living room in the house, determined that Troy was going to become a city. And he loved inviting people in, and I felt very honored to be invited into the house, actually sit in that spot on the floor. It's very important that the house be moved so that it can be preserved and that it become an educational tool. And you have the funds to do everything, and you say you're shovel ready, so I assume that's what that means.
The preliminary site plan has been approved by both the Planning Commission and by City Council.
Right.
And permits are being pulled, I guess.
The final site plan has been approved. There is, as you can tell from the memo you have, we will come back to you at the next council meeting. So I'm personally glad you're meeting next week. We can thank you. We will come back to you with an amendment to the letter of agreement that the Historical Society has with the City of Troy to allow them to move forward quickly with this section of the project. And it's a project with a very clearly defined scope. It is to prepare the Livernois site to lift the house. It is to prepare the museum site to receive it, to move the structure, put it on a permanent foundation, complete that foundation, provide suitable utilities and security for the house, and make whatever restorations are important on the exterior so that it's acceptable for the community, reclaim the Livernois site, and we're done. The Society will continue to raise funds to continue with the interior restorations at a future time.
What type of a time frame are we looking at for actually moving the house? I noticed it said in good weather, so it's
If all
obvious.
goes well, the date that the architects and the Heritage Campaign have talked about, I believe, is early October.
Early October,
That gives us 6 good weeks, we hope, of good Michigan weather in which to complete the work. You know, we have been told by the architect, and I know this from when we moved the church in Parsonage, you can move a structure any time during the year, but you need dry weather. And our chances of having a good dry day diminish as we get closer
Right.
to November. So out of safety concerns for all workers and out of our ability to do really good work, we would prefer to get the house relocated when we still have a window of opportunity in the weather.
the new foundation, of course, will be prepared in
Right.
advance of the move.
What other question, Mr. Zerley?
I was going to say, if we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, and then I had a question of you after your
Okay.
questions are asked of us.
Council members, do you have any other questions?
Do it.
Okay,
And
good.
then, but first I have a question for Ward and Lorraine. Is it possible, I'm assuming that we're going to get a consensus from council to make this an agenda item next week to modify the contract, but can we do something in advance of that issue?
I believe the Historical Society, the Heritage Campaign, you're ready to go forward with the architects to at least begin the process of selecting
Oh, yeah.
a general contractor, but they will not establish a contract until you have completed your amendment.
Okay. So we can still do some work this week?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So, do you want us to go around the table and nod if we're in favor, or what do you, I mean, we don't have a resolution here, but,
No, just wanted to get general directions, and
Okay,
we'll come back
all right.
formally next week.
okay. All right, so it'll come back to us on the agenda on 16th.
Thank you
We'll
very
see
much.
you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ward, thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Very good job. I believe that Lorraine's going to become the safe build of museums. South Michigan, I really believe that. That's how sharp that she is.
She'll have a different
Yes.
moniker, though. She'll become safe. Okay.
The next item is something, again, it's a policy issue that I'd like direction on, and then we'll come back for formalization. If we can do it next week, we will. And that is our tax abatement policy. The city manager now is, in the manager's office per se, is becoming directly involved in economic development. We think that that's the only arrow in our quiver of recovery, is to do what we can to retain and attract new businesses. And having said that, our current what's called an IFT tax abatement policy, or industrial facilities tax exemption policy, pertains essentially to personal property only. And could I ask Nino and Pam to join us? Jim can join us too at the table. Is that all right?
Mhm.
Okay. And they have more specificity on this topic than I do. Well, not Jim, but Nino and Pam do. And Mark. But sorry, Jim. But I asked Nino today how many other cities only offer personal property on their tax abatement policies, and I forgot the number. What was it?
It used to be 2, us and one other community. I
Okay.
think we're the only one right now
All right.
that
So,
doesn't offer real property abatement.
and again, as the gentleman mentioned earlier today, I received a telephone call from a property owner in New York City. He said, "John, we said, Mr. Zerlag, it's you or another city. We prefer Troy but we need to know what incentive you can offer. And then when I rattled him off, he said, well, what about tax abatement on real property? I said, we don't offer that, but I would certainly be happy to get direction from City Council to see if you wanted to modify your policy. And if Nino or Pam or Mark want to add anything to that statement, that's fine. If not, we'll answer any questions that you have.
John, Madam Mayor, do you mind?
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to make an opportunity. I know City Council knows Nino and Mr. Nash, but I don't know if you've ever met Pam Valentek. Pam is our economic development specialist, and she's been with the city 4 years? 3 years. And she is the face of the city day-to-day in economic development. She's meeting with all the companies, retention, and also attraction. And she's out there day-to-day in the trenches of economic development. I just wanted to introduce her.
And if there is a policy that you tell us to proceed with and bring back next week, we would recommend that it be tax revenue neutral. In other words, if we adopt a policy, we don't want to lose any money by granting an abatement. So our baseline would be what the revenue is at this point in time, and then we'd have to have an additional revenue in order for it to kick in.
Do you want to explore that even further?
I'm sorry, we can.
Numbers of jobs, or you understand?
So that it's obvious that if other communities were the last one to decide if we do decide, to give it to real property, I'm assuming that they felt that that was going to ensure that they were going to have more money coming in than going out.
Excellent point, and I don't mean to give an abbreviated explanation, but generally this constitutes our local match to have the company qualify for what's known as a MEGA grant, which essentially is a tax abatement or forgiveness on the SBA, the small business tax, SBT, by a company, and that is predicated on a tiered approach for a number of jobs that are going to be created, and it's audited by the state of Michigan. We'd have a similar tiered approach. We have one right now, I believe, don't we, Nino?
Yes.
Yes, you do.
And we could certainly follow that to include real property as well. And the definition for an industrial facility's tax facility has been greatly expanded from the putting a nut on a wheel to to high-tech industries, ancillary industries to car companies, so that actually people could work in an office and be high-tech. They could do engineering work, they could do software work, essentially with the exception probably of accounting firms. And what else would you say, Nino?
Well, basically, they're allowing intellectual property now to be exempted. Retail operations, accounting firms, law firms, things of that nature are still not abated. But the high-tech definition has been expanded so much that you can have engineering firms that basically create software to do a job, and that can be abated now at this point in time. Allows them to qualify under that policy, and it's a very broad definition. That's the latest client that Pam was speaking with. They basically don't make anything. They don't make a solid. They make software to expedite shipping. All of that stuff qualifies now. Our policy is broad enough that we can include that, but we do not allow real property abatement. And where John was speaking about the revenue neutral, I had a conversation a little earlier with a couple council members. A lot of these people are moving into vacant buildings. The taxable value is artificially deflated because of that vacancy. So a $5 million taxable value generates about $47,000 for the city of Troy. You'd be giving up $23,500 of those dollars by abating that building. In order to offset that, that company would have to come in with about $20 million in personal property. Would have a $10 million assessment. They'd be paying half of the taxes on that. So there's your $5 million again. You get back your $23,500. That's really all I can recommend as you're an assessor. As an assessor, tax abatement is not uniform and it's not fair. And it is judgmental for you to have that, but it's a huge tool. And all of these other communities are using that tool to take companies away from Troy. Pam could tell you, we lost a very large project because we didn't offer real property abatement. The project went to South Lyon, I think. Was it South Lyon? Van Buren Township. A very big project, would have been $30, $40, $50 million. We weren't even in the running. because we couldn't offer them real property abatement. So I understand as a council that you would want to use that tool. As a person that works in the finance division of this community, I think revenue neutral is a minimum that you should be looking for. You shouldn't be losing any money on the tax abatement. That's just flat out. Doesn't make any sense in this economy. And I think if that limits some of the people that can come here, so be it. But we're not in a position to be giving away revenue at this point in time. And when the last time the policy was amended, when Mr. Murphy brought it before you, he brought in a matrix that council adopted. And that's basically the Warren matrix. That's the matrix that Warren, Michigan uses to determine how many years they're going to give a company. And we opened up the policy at that point in time to a lot more companies than we used to. At this point in time, you need to make some fundamental changes to the policy. Eliminate the criteria that it's zoned industrially. Open up to real property. That's the big one. But then there's also some vagueness about where these people can go, and you need to open that up. We've got a lot of empty space all over the city, and it may not be a good idea to limit where you allow these people to go. I mean, a full building is a full building. When the policy was amended last time, council had decided that half a loaf was better than none. That's what you'd be looking at here, and that's the revenue neutral theory, though, too. So you don't give away anything that you already have in your hand.
Could this apply to a company that is already within Troy and
Absolutely.
expanding?
Absolutely.
But
Our
they
current
have to
policy
show-
allows that now.
Okay.
This wouldn't change that.
Okay.
They would just have to make a new investment.
We'd have to have a new
That's what I mean, they'd have to make a
Only
new
to the
investment, so,
Right. Yeah, only to the new investment,
Right.
not to their existing tax base.
okay, right.
I think an important thing here to recognize too is it is performance-based. If the company never makes the investment in the real property, if they never actually go out and buy the machinery and equipment that they had presented in their application, we are not giving up anything. There's no cash given up front. So, and it kind of goes along with a lot of the spirit of what the state incentives are too, which is performance-based.
Councilman Beltramini?
Question for Pam, and the only reason we even consider abatements is to stay competitive. Do other communities have matrices on how and what they offer?
It used to be in the past that everyone just gave everyone 12 years. That's what the state law says. They changed that 20 years ago to say up to 12 years. Communities got in trouble for giving one guy 8 years and one guy 4 years when it basically was the same investment. So the courts basically force you to have a matrix so that they can look at this chart and say, okay, I'm creating 25 jobs, I get 2 years, I've got a 10-year lease, I get 2 years, I'm investing $20 million, I get 5 years, I have a 9-year abatement available to me. So the matrix is basically determined by the court, by a court decision. So pretty much every community has a matrix of some type or another. They don't necessarily match ours.
But the matrix is nice because it makes it easier for us to communicate what a company is eligible for. And the MEDC, which is the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, that's the state kind of equivalent of what we're doing here on the city level, this makes it easy for them as well when they are starting their initial conversations with attraction projects. They will look at communities that are using these tools, and if we are using these tools that the state's making available, they're more likely to direct some of those attraction projects to us. So, and I think looking at job creation, their commitment to the city from the standpoint of building terms and the actual capital investment in the project, I think they're three great areas to look at.
And we heard from the gentleman that was here this evening about his interest in it, and we have some, I know, but we also have some other companies that are interested. And you say we've had some that were interested that went elsewhere because we didn't offer it. Okay.
Madam Mayor, just to let you know that this issue comes up almost on a daily basis. I mean, tax abatements.
Right.
Pam is being called by the MEDC, and they're asking what can we potentially do for a match.
Right.
And at certain times we end up not having a potential match, so we're not in the running.
And the state is very much cracking down on that from the standpoint of they very much see this as this needs to be a partnership. They use the terminology of everybody has to have some skin in the game. to try and attract these large projects to bring the jobs to the region. So if we are using the tools that they're making available, they're more likely to work with us and partner with us to try and attract these projects.
Would this be something we could have on the agenda for the 16th, or does it have to wait till the 23rd?
I would say the 16th would be fine, there's not too much tweaking to do. Is that right, Pam?
Okay. Mhm.
Mark, do you know?
That's up to you, boss. I'll be out of town that week.
No, I joined.
16th it is.
Okay. Unless council, had, Councilman Snyder?
I'm kind of new, to council, so I've been trying to educate myself, and I was trying to look at the historical, how this came about last time, and there wasn't a lot of historical stuff provided, but I did look back, and there were 2 negative votes, and I was wondering, what is the negative to this? It doesn't seem negative to me. It seems positive to me to do these kind of things, but why would it be negative?
Well, and actually, our policy has changed over a long period of
understand
years
that, but-
from where we stood, but with economic changes,
With today's world, what is really negative about this?
Can I address that question? I've been here, as a matter of fact, yesterday was 31 years. The initial policy was drafted in 1978. It didn't allow any real property abatement at all, and it was a loose policy. Back in that time, that passed 7-0. We made some adjustments to the policy to allow different types of buildings and companies to qualify. And the issue at that point in time, whenever there's been a no vote on a tax abatement issue, the rationale has always been that if the tax policy is broken, it's broken for everyone, and that the council shouldn't be picking winners and losers. And quite frankly, I felt that way myself, and I probably still feel that way myself, except for the fact that we're losing large companies to other communities that are not afraid to take that plunge. And every single time an amendment has been made to the policy, the rationale has still been on the negative side of the vote, that if it's broken for this guy, it's broken for everybody. And if you can't fix it for everybody, you shouldn't be picking winners and losers. That's basically the rationale. The last time that it was brought up was the first time I'd heard the half a loaf of bread argument, which is a pretty darn good argument when you've got all these buildings that are vacant. You've got buildings that are vacant, you're not generating any revenue at all, you're still providing some services to those properties, at least you're getting half of the revenue to pay for those services. So historically, that's the way it's been.
Councilman Beltrame?
Well,
Councilman Howard?
I think that was well put, and I generally am not in favor of tax abatements, but I do think if we're going to have a policy, it should be fair. And one of the things that I would like to see is if we could make it more favorable to somebody who's actually, if there's a real estate transfer and they're basically uncapturing or recapturing from a vacant building to a now fully occupied, owner-occupied building, there's going to be that bump up. And even if we abate it, so if we can have some sort of incentive for that.
The issue right now is that there is no bump up. And especially after this coming year for the 11-12 year, taxable value and assessed value is going to be the same number all the way across the board. So even if there's a sale, there's not necessarily going to be a change in the taxable value of that property, which is why I wanted to make it revenue neutral, because that assessed value or that taxable value could actually drop after the sale, and then you're losing more revenue. So in order to keep it fair and even, I thought, that's just my suggestion, obviously you guys will have to decide on that revenue neutral is the way to go, because we're predicting a 20% drop in industrial values for next year, where we were only at 10 or 12, and a 15% drop in commercial values for next year. I mean, those are two huge numbers. So even with the transfer of ownership, the odds are good that the taxable value on the property is going to reduce again.
Okay. Now the other item that does concern me is this property plant investment part of the matrix. And the reason why that concerns me is because your abatement is on new property plant investment, and so the amount that they're investing really shouldn't be germane to how long their abatement is, because it's going to be a percentage. If it's $750,000 or $20 million, and it kind of puts the little guy who's going to get an abatement at a disadvantage. And since it's a ratio, I don't think the size is really as much of an issue because you're only meeting 50%.
Well, the rationale for that portion of the chart, first off, let me be clear, you only have to qualify for 2 out of the 3 on the chart. And the rationale for that was basically the taxpayers. You would have a guy that would come in and say, I'm bringing $20 million worth of equipment in here, you want to offer me a 1-year abatement, I'll go somewhere else. You know, so the larger their investment, the longer the term they're looking for, because it's a much larger cash outlay. The other thing that's not in the policy itself is that they only have 2 years to get up to speed. We see several proposals that Pam gets where these guys will give us a 5-year plan or an 8-year plan, and we tell them, we can do an abatement on the first 2 years, and if you want to get the years 3 and 4, you have to come back for another abatement. If you want to get years 8, 9, and 10, you have to come back for another abatement, because the state law is very clear. It's 2 years. From the December 31st after you're approved, you've got 2 years to have everything there. And if not, we can bring it back to council to adjust it. So that's the other issue, though. But the main thing on the investment for the personal property is because they didn't want to bring in a lot of money and only get a 2-year abatement out of it. Nobody wants to spend $40 million and get 2 years worth of an abatement when they can go to Auburn Hills, for instance, and get 12. So, but it's two out of the 3 is all you have to qualify for.
Yeah, and I guess I would just speak to the fact that, say, $40 million for a Ford or a GM isn't the same as $40 million to, let's say, for example, an Altair or some other business that's here in Troy. And so if there's some way, maybe we can just look at other matrices or even a ratio.
We can. And one other issue I need to bring up about that, though, is that there generally is a structural relationship between the amount of personal property that they're buying and the size of the building. In general, it's $3 of real property for every $1 of personal property. So if someone's bringing in $20 million, the odds are very good that they're in a much larger building than the guy that's bringing in $750,000. It does kind of tend to level off the abatement based on the quantity. Okay, that was an rationale for that. And it's very easy to see that, too. I mean, we can prove that fact all the time, but generally it's $3 of real property for every $1 of personal property. So a $20 million personal property investment is generally going to be a $60 million facility.
Councilman Beltrame?
No, I have a follow-up question to all of this. I think that at least those of us who have spoken don't have a problem with finding a way to do this. My question is, are there other tools that the state puts in the toolbox that we aren't using that may be hurting us with business or with the state? I know you included a lot of stuff, including distressed cities, which thank God not even the state thinks we're distressed. But are there other things that you would like to see council consider in a policy change that would help you?
There are other elements, but taking the philosophy of General Patton, who said a good plan today beats a perfect plan tomorrow. Most of the calls that we get are for tax abatement on real property. And so the thinking was that we should advance that first, get that out of the way, and then in tandem with that we can look at other economic incentives. But we really felt it important because of the calls that we get and the urgency for the real property tax abatement first. But we'll certainly look at the other issues that were included in your packet.
Yeah, I would like to see that because I agree with you. Okay, let's get this done today. But I don't want to always be in a reactive mode. And I would like to, put on your creative thinking caps. There may be something that we could do within the law that nobody's even thought of yet. So.
Well, I think we have included in the packet some fact sheets on some other tools that are being used that we do get inquiries on, not as frequent as we do the real property, the PA 198 real property, but
Stuff like that, it might be interesting to know too. I mean, we know who our competitive communities are. Know who has the ability to use those tools and who doesn't. So that our toolbox is full eventually.
Madam Mayor, all of those that were included, we could eventually qualify for. I know the one with distressed cities, but there was a determination by MEDC which would allow Troy qualify if we decided to go along that route.
Yeah, I think that's the 328.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
In the fact sheet isn't that clear on it, but with the 328, if the MEDC is looking at a project that is mega eligible, the community where that project will be located has the option to provide, a 328.
Even though we're technically not a distressed community.
Correct. And those would be the only projects at this time that we would be able to use that tool on. And it would have to be a mega project.
Okay, any other? Councilwoman Kerwin?
I'm very pleased to see this come forward. I'm glad that we'll be able to act on it next week. I think I do understand what Councilmember Beltramini is saying. We know that we have sister cities not far, and they're very proud of their ability to attract and retain. And anything that can be learned from that and modeled and brought before us with alacrity, I think it would be a very worthwhile. A couple other comments, if I may. One for our newer members, Councilmember Slater said he wasn't that familiar. We have, in fact, had before us a company that within 2 years did not show, and that is removed. So there's good follow-up. We want to thank Mr. Licari for always keeping us informed on that. So we have seen that. But more often than not, I know that we have at SEMCOG see some of the companies slipping through our fingers, and so it's important that we do both. Earlier in the meeting, we were talking about some of the cuts, often severe, that we've been making. Cutting our way out of this won't work. It's so important that we continue to attract, retain, and build support in the community so that we can be determined, as the reference to Judge Barnard made, about a positive tomorrow. And I know that I feel very positive about tomorrow. And I know the more that we can build that strength of community and trust in what we're doing, we'll make them all.
Councilwoman McGinnis?
And just to concur, I think with what you're hearing at the table, there was another attachment in our agenda as well, which was more informational, but it highlighted economic development and what's been going on, I think, with some of the projects in the city. I was also excited to see that there's a page attached that kind of describes some of the outreach that you're doing as well. So I think it's really relevant that we receive that in addition to the conversation that we're having tonight. And I think it's very important. I think that this is something that as a community we can agree on. That's a tool that we really have to work hard to establish in light of everything else that's going on around us. I'm really happy to see this moving forward. I'm happy we're having a meeting next week so we can work on it.
Mayor Pro Tem Fleming?
I think you know my position, I'm in full support. But I'm just wondering if there's anything the city manager needs and his team needs to prepare for next week. Do you think you have all the answers you need, or
Again, I just
we
wanted
give
to
you
get,
enough direction? Are you ready to go so we get the
yes, sir.
something we can move forward with next week?
Again, just wanted to get direction, because if there wasn't a sense that you wanted to offer this incentive, then we just would have let it die. But since I have a sense that you want to proceed with this economic development tool to make us more competitive in terms of our surrounding communities and outstate, then we will have a policy for your approval next week. It'll be close to what you see here, but it'll include real property. It'll be tax. It'll have to be tax revenue neutral. We don't want to lose money, and it'll be regardless of zoning classification, but more applicable toward the use as operationally defined under the IFT guidelines.
I agree in this environment. We have to have everything in the toolbox we can, so I agree with Councilman Beltramini. Let's continue to look for things we can do to entice business. We don't want to be a Me Too city. We have to be a little special.
Any other on that item?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Gee, Pam will be
Thank
going
you.
down for another
Pam Mark.
entrepreneurial award. We'll be going down
Yeah.
that.
Cities?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, no.
I will.
I said, that's what, when you didn't go, you know, it's always, you guys are all busy, and Pam and Cindy and I.
Adjourn this meeting?
Yes, we're in adjournment.